All right, guys, another fantastic guest on the Sad Truth. I've got Greg Gutfeld from Fox here with us, and we'll talk about why he works at such a Nazi propaganda network in a few seconds. He is the host of the Greg Gutfeld Show on Fox. He's also one of the five co-panelists on The Five, also running on Fox. Uh, Many books, let me list them because you should probably read all of them. The Scoreboard, the official point system for keeping score in the relationship game, that's almost 20 years old. The Scorecard at Work, the official point system for keeping score on the job. Boy, you keep a lot of scores. Lessons from the Land of Pork Scratchings, the Bible of Unspeakable Truths, the Sad Truth being one of them. The Joy of Hate, How to Triumph Over Whiners in the Age of Phony Outrage. I love that title. Not Cool, the Hipster Elite and Their War on You. And finally, the most recent one, How to Be Right, the Art of Being Persuasively Correct. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Good to hear from you.
Like,
Just sitting here in the rain in New York.
oftentimes people write to me and say, how do you meet all these people? What kind of network do you have? And so I thought I would actually start by explaining how we met and link it to a scientific phenomenon. So you and I originally met because you had very kindly chosen one of my books, The Consuming Instinct, as one of your favorite books. If you wish to add more compliments later, please feel free to do so.
Absolutely. One of those. It's one of those books that I worked in health journalism for a long time at Men's Health and Prevention magazine, and I was taught that you always should have like a hot spot in every paragraph. So there's like a little fact in there that makes you go wow, like the fact that an M&M, if you eat one M&M, you have to walk one city block, so that you will never forget that fact because it's so mind blowing. What I liked about your book was that almost like every paragraph had something in there that you have to underline, like the stuff about sun tanning,
Right.
or the stuff about like the sex differences in weird behaviors. Like, this is great stuff, and then you can actually use it to apply to service journalism. Like, you could say, here's what you should do, and that's I did that through the 90s with evolutionary biology and psychology. I would put that in Men's Health rather than interview typical self-help doctors. I would look at stuff by, I think David Buss and Helen Fisher use that stuff instead and interview her for my stories, because I always found that that's where the real information is.
It's funny that you mentioned
sense.
these two people. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Helen Fisher was one of the endorsers of The Consuming Instinct, and David Buss wrote the foreword to The Consuming Instinct. So you're smack on in terms of the great experts.
I have a great Helen Fisher story. Do you know that Helen Fisher and I went to hedonism together?
Hedonism.
Is that mind-blowing?
Is that true?
Yes.
Wow.
That
This is in Jamaica, right?
I did a picture. What?
You're breaking
It's like
up a
a
bit.
half nude. Pardon me?
You're breaking up a
Say
bit.
again?
You're breaking up the connection.
I don't know what.
Oh,
Damn it. I can still hear you.
okay. Go
but,
on. Let's go on and let's see what happens.
All right. Well, anyway, when I worked at Men's Health, I had this idea called the Wild Kingdom, where I would go to a swingers resort with an anthropologist, and we treat it like it was like a safari, or like the Wild Kingdom, where you watch the animals, how their mating rituals and stuff like that. And I think I contacted a couple of anthropologists, and they were like, "No, thanks," but they kept saying, "You got to talk to Ellen Fisher." And I had read one of her books, which I think was Anatomy of Love or something like that. And so I met her at a bar, like in the Upper East Side. She brought a man with her to make sure I wasn't a freak, and we made a little contract on a paper napkin that we swore that whatever would happen there was like, we wouldn't talk about it afterwards. And then we went to hedonism, and it turned out to be a great piece. We would go to the swimming pools and to the clubs where people were picking up, and she would just give ongoing commentary, and I would write it down while talking to women. It was an amazing experience, and we had a blast.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, she was something else.
Yeah, she's lovely.
I've had her on my show a couple of times. She's just brilliant.
I'm assuming that the wave of invitations from your show that are directed at me have just been lost in the mail, or somehow I haven't gotten them in the email, because that's the only rational.
There's so many Gad Sads out there. So I'm sure there's one I think there's one in Israel right now, or Egypt, who's like getting all the invites.
There you go. So to continue of how we met, so then because of your gracious endorsement of my book, we connected on Twitter, and here we are now having a chat when we probably would have never had an opportunity to meet one another. And now I'd like to link that to a phenomenon called the small world phenomenon, which some people might have heard of it. The idea that as long as you don't include closed societies we could link any two people anywhere in the world through fewer than 6 links. And now with social media, you could even probably reduce that number from lower than 6, right? So that guys like you and I, who otherwise operate in completely different spheres, can meet and get to know one another, right?
I agree. In fact, you know, it's when people say it's a small world, they're right and wrong. Like when you're in the if you're in the airport and you run into somebody that you haven't seen and you go, oh my God, I can't believe. Actually, it makes perfect sense, because chances are, if you are similar, you're trafficking or traveling in the same world. So it may seem like the world is this massive place with 6 billion people, but actually you're only seeing the same 1,000, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, incidentally, speaking of the small world, I recently had, I'm sure you know him because he often appears on Fox, and he has a Fox show with Anthony Scaramucci.
Oh, yeah.
And now apparently he's been slated, or he's been invited to be on Trump's transition team. So now I can say that I am only 2 degrees removed from the grand devil himself, Donald Trump, which we should... Well, yeah, go ahead.
You don't need... I know Donald.
Oh, so there you go. So I don't need Anthony.
Yeah, you're basically, you don't need Anthony. Yeah, no. President-elect Trump used to call me after my Red Eye shows, because he's up all night. So we would watch Red Eye, which is on at like 3 a.m. in New York. He would call me, and he knew everything about the show. I'm talking about the last 3 or 4 years. He called me like 2 or 3 times. Then I did a speech in Florida and spent a lot of time with him there, and got to know him. I think he's probably miffed that I wasn't a cheerleader. Right. Like I believe that you have to be, if you like somebody, you got to be critical, because you want them to up their game. But I think he wasn't used to. I think he was used to people being complimentary, and I wasn't one of the people, cheerleading, leading the parade. I was, whenever he screwed up, I said, "You screwed up." He might hate me now.
You would tell him this as you're speaking to him, or on your show, that he screwed up.
We never spoke.
Oh, I see.
After he did my show, and I asked, it was right before he declared, and I said, "Are you going to run for president?" And I said, "You should run for president. It's going to be awesome." And then we talked about how I would be his press secretary, and then that was the last time we spoke. And then he made that comment about when he walked down the escalator and made that mistake about talking about Mexico. And I said, my theory, and it's not my theory, it's a lot of people's theories, is that when you have a sound idea, it always bums you out when somebody kind of pees in that pool. Like they take one of your ideas and then because they screw it up, it makes the whole idea bad. So it's like, you may be for tough borders and more stricter immigration, but when somebody says they're bringing the rapists, it goes, no, that's not how you articulate it. There's a better way to say this.
By the way, this happens in my scientific work, because evolutionary theory in general, biology in general, Darwinian theory, because it has been usurped by all sorts of nefarious groups like the Nazis to justify their actions, or eugenicists, or social class elitists, suddenly all the social scientists hate evolutionary theory because it's the work of the devil, when of course it has absolutely nothing to do with that. So it's exactly what you're saying.
In fact, I mean, like, there's certain things that you can't talk about, any kind of differences, whether it's sex or race, because it's already been co-opted by a really grotesque group of people. And that happens even with immigration. You can't talk about, practical solutions for anything, because you'll say, well, you're just part of that evil group. And so that's my criticism, was that President-elect Trump played fast and loose with certain kinds of ideas. Even though his heart might have been in the right place, his mouth often wasn't. Right. So I was always like, can't you just say it a little bit better? Right. Say it better.
Yeah, look, packaging matters, right? I might talk about, here's an example of a very small study, but that captures the idea of packaging. You could take the exact same product, basketball, athletic socks, put them in a fancy package or a non-fancy package, ask people to try them out. Even though it's the exact same product, people will infer much higher quality to the one that's in the fancy package. So take Donald Trump, improve some of his sort of linguistic fluidity, and then suddenly he might become less nefarious and less of a Nazi, right?
Yeah, and then he might not be as popular because he tells it like it is. That's the issue. That's why I'm always open to being incorrect. Like, what if he took my advice and lost? It's because he decided to speak like a more sophisticated person rather than connect. And let's face it, he connected. So it's like he was probably wise to ignore me. A lot of people are wise to ignore me.
So what do you think are? I mean, I guess there's a confluence of forces that led to him being elected. Of course, the rejection of political correctness, the rejection of identity politics, the fact that he speaks in a regular manner that's not part of the sort of the elite class. What are some other factors that you think that led to his incredible victory?
I think the first three things you said are the stool. That's the thing. Not literally, but the actual table, the legs of the stool. The other thing is, and I talked about this when he started. When Senator Obama ran, he had the historical bubble. He lacked the experience that Senator McCain had, but it didn't matter because he was the first. He's going to be the first African American. He had this kind of like historical bubble. Trump had a historical bubble as an entertainer, that this was the first time somebody could go out and say things and then somebody go, oh, it's just Trump. He's a TV guy. He can say that stuff. So when he makes when he makes jokes about Rosie O'Donnell or whatever, everybody goes, it's like, oh, that Donald. We had a segment called I think it was called Oh, That Donald. It was like he would say things and you just go, he can do that. And so I think what he did, which was he's like the spear, that the tip of the spear that kind of like punctured the PC movement. He allowed other people to start saying things. And I think the good part about it is, people are now distinguishing language from act,
right?
Which is really important because we've kind of conflated the two in the last 20 or 30 years. Saying something is no longer the same as doing something. So he's shown that. And he's upset me, and I've had to learn how to go, hey, these are just words. They're just words, Greg. Because I've been arguing about that forever. It's like, words don't matter. But so that the positive thing is that people can now feel free to speak, and maybe that will affect the campuses, right, where they ban speakers, and where comedians. There's so many comedians that are upset about Trump. Yet they've been voicing the same issues about, there are comedians who say they don't want to go on campus anymore because they're worried about their material causing problems. You should thank Trump because he's helping to deflate that problem. Now, the bad side is railing against the politically correct doesn't mean you could be an asshole, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So it goes back to the original point, the peeing in the pool of rhetoric. Right. All of a sudden you have somebody else who's saying, I'm with you. But you don't want to be with that person, right, whoever he is.
But speaking about the comedians, you're highlighting there something that I criticize amongst the castrated class, or the faux liberals, as I call them. They're incredible. They're stifling moral hypocrisy and sense of false equivalences. And I recently released on my channel a sad truth where I exactly spoke of this. And let me repeat it here and then get your reaction. So, for example, I will post endless stuff regarding the just innumerable cases of genocidal mayhem that is imparted on the world globally by one ideology. We won't say what it is, right? All of my academic colleagues, right? I live in the viper's den of political correctness, right? So for me, for example, to have preferred Trump over Hillary Clinton, I must have been some devil unicorn, right? But in any case, I said basically, here's what happens to all of the faux liberals. They are perfectly quiet when exposed to just profound, grotesque attacks on human dignity. But when they hear that a friend of a friend told a janitor who knew a cousin that there is three white guys in a pickup truck who hurled an insult at an apparent immigrant, and this was caused by Trump, because of the new Trump reality, they all get on Facebook and they are outraged and they are incensed and they are so afraid to go buy tomatoes because a new era of darkness has been ushered by Trump. And I despise this moral hypocrisy. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that, part of it is they are lazy.
Right.
It's easy to express this outrage. They don't even bother to look up to see if it's true. Like right now, I've read 3 or 4 examples in the media, people talking about hate crimes that have been caused by exactly what you said, Trump's election. We know, because you've done the research, we've all looked at this, I've written about it. A lot of these things turn out to be hoaxes by people seeking attention. They're like volunteer firemen who set fires. So there'll be a guy that says, somebody wrote this on my dorm door, like a swastika, or they'll put a noose, and they always find out after 3 days of investigation in a tearful confession in a room. And the first thing they do, the left does, is, well, that incident might not be true, but you know it's true somewhere else. So I think we've learned and raised awareness by this act that never took place. That's what gets me. It gets me. And it's like, so it doesn't. You're telling me that it matters when it happens and it matters when it doesn't happen. So that means.
So even the scam is a teachable moment, basically.
The scam is a teachable moment. It's amazing. By the way, after you said Devil Unicorn, that's going to be the name of my metal band.
I want royalties.
Yes, absolutely. But so to your point, there's a laziness. It's easy to express outrage if you don't have to do anything about it. For example, if you want to know about the atrocities in the Middle East, you're going to have to read about it. And also, you got to be brave enough to bring it up into conversation when somebody else is doing it. And that's a lot of work, too. All of this requires work. If you look at, like, I know that you've been on Sam Harris's podcast, but like Sam Harris has endured slings and arrows for what? For kind of just speaking common sense about the violence in Islam. And he's like, nobody wants to pay that price. And they look at other people paying that price and they go, I'm glad that's not me. Well, I don't want to be threatened all the time. I don't want to lose speaking gigs. That's what people are thinking.
But you know what? Eventually, the dark wave is going to catch up to you. And so that's what I try to compel people to do. I say, look, I take great personal and professional risks for what I do, right? Mm-hmm. And yet I do it because I simply can't put down my head on my pillow at the end of the day, knowing that I could have done something, however small voice that I may have. Yeah. I'm doing my part, and I would feel like a coward and a fraud if I said, well, it's not for me to do it. I receive often private messages from people, many times academics, who say, my God, you're my hero, you're so courageous, I wish I had the courage. And I say, listen, if you don't have the courage to do so now, as things are going, you're going to have lesser and lesser window of opportunity to speak. So grow a pair and start speaking when you still have the chance. Are you there? Are you there?
Me?
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm here. I think I'm here. But
yeah, you're breaking up. I don't know what's going on. Oh, okay. Now you're good. Can you speak?
You sound perfectly fine.
Okay. Keep
it could just be the fact that the weather sucks. Okay. Yeah, but anyway, no, I would say that maybe in this new era, people can actually be more free to speak about what is going on right now on this planet. That there's a pernicious, toxic doctrine, call it radical Islam. That is like, that wants. I mean, I'm worried about that and artificial intelligence, and I don't know which one's worse yet. I don't know. I wake at night and I go like, artificial intelligence. We're going to be slaves to artificial intelligence in 10 years. And then I think about radical Islam, and I think about all it takes is one nefarious agent to get a dirty bomb. And so I keep going back and forth. I'm not sure which one's worse yet.
But by the way, and if you listened to my chat with Sam Harris, one of the things that I tried to point out to him is that people have in my view, an incorrect understanding of the dangers that are posed by this ideology, because they think in a very short-term window, right? What will happen if we let in refugees in terms of having an increased likelihood of a terrorist attack, or the example that you gave with the dirty bomb? But there's a longer window threat, and that is that as there is a shift in demographic realities, as a society becomes more Islamized, then freedoms go out the window. I mean, that's about as clear as the existence of gravity. So sure, we could look at what happens if we let in 50,000, 100,000 Syrians tomorrow, and can we vet them or not? And that's a very important issue. But the more general question is, what happens when the fabric of our Western values are altered when you let in people, many of whom don't share any of those values? And so I actually think that in the long-term perspective, that's a greater danger.
Right. It's an interesting... and you would know the word for this. it's not like a contradiction, but the argument is we should be welcoming in people who wish to wish to replace the culture that is welcoming.
Yeah, well, I call this part of the ostrich castrati brigade, right? Ostrich, in that the metaphor is that you put your head in the sand and you deny,
Right.
and castrati is because you are completely a coward without any testicular fortitude. Combine these two together, and you come up with people who are perfectly parasitized, even in terms of having a survival instinct to protect themselves.
Right. You brought up, or I did first, the podcast with Harris. What I liked about that, and I mentioned it, because it's something in my head, and it goes back to this, is that I think it was asking you about Trump, right? And
Right.
you said that people, if they have one issue,
Yes.
that is extremely important to them, that issue should kind of allow you to not dismiss, but kind of push the other stuff that might be disagreeable to the side. And I thought that was a very clear way of putting it. That, like, it's okay. My number one thing is like, how do we deal with the threat of radical Islam? And maybe Trump's language. I'm not crazy about it, but weighing those two things,
Exactly.
I think I can deal with a few of his crude remarks, right?
Well, and
that was an interesting thing. But then I don't know if you listened to the podcast. This I thought was hilarious. And Sam Harris with Andrew Sullivan.
oh no, I specifically try to avoid those conversations because it will increase my blood pressure. My physician said I need to control my blood pressure.
You had to. What was interesting about it was Sam Harris and the two smart people talking about how Hillary Clinton is preferable to Donald Trump. And it was about a 2.5-hour podcast. But during it, they began by going over the problems of Hillary Clinton, so that halfway through the podcast, anybody who wasn't going to vote for Trump was. It was like they go, before we condemn Mr. Trump, let's go through all of the problems with Hillary Clinton. And Andrew Sullivan spent an hour destroying Hillary Clinton. And then at the middle, it was like, I think even Sam Harris said, wow, I think maybe we might have convinced people that maybe she's the best, because it did to me. I'm like, listening, I'm going like, wow, Andrew Sullivan just convinced me not to vote for Hillary Clinton. Not that I was,
Right.
But it was like he just went through everything, and then they got to Trump. But I thought it was I think Andrew Sullivan was so hysterical about it that it's not true. It reminded me of 1980. I was 16 when Ronald Reagan was elected, and I was living in California, and the people there were freaking out that, oh my God, this horrible dictator. He was a terrible governor. Actually, it was okay. But everybody was freaking out, and then nothing happened.
Well,
nothing happened.
This faux fear is so obnoxious, and and again, not to sort of use my personal history to sort of beat down people with their stupidity, but it's relevant. So when we left Lebanon, we escaped execution in Lebanon. My parents were kidnapped in Lebanon. We went. I mean, whatever you see with ISIS is what I grew up with in Lebanon,
right,
and I escaped from. So then you juxtapose that to the endless fear that people are. I mean, literally the first 3 or 4 days on my personal Facebook feed of academics who are sharing sort of firsthand account of how afraid they are, and they would always start with sort of some identity politics. I am a woman from India, and sort of this is why I am now afraid to go and buy tomatoes at the grocery store. I just thought that it was so extraordinarily fake. I mean, such a form of collective, paranoia that it was almost laughable.
I got to tell you, speaking of fake, so Tuesday night, I do the 5, and then I do a hit with the FNC with election headquarters. I walk to this bar because I got to be there for 4 hours. The doorman there recognizes me, really tall, in a suit, Jamaican guy, goes, tell me, is Trump going to win? Trump must win. Trump must win. If Trump loses, America is no longer the leader of the free world. And I'm like going, wow. And so I look at my phone. I got this New York Times gauge that shows you, and it's got 90% Hillary's going to win. And I go, dude, look at this. And he's like, oh, and he's like crushed. And then I go into the bar, I sit down, and I see the gauge moving, and it's freaking everybody. It's like you're watching people in the bar going, holy crap. Now it's 60% now. So I go outside and I go up to him and I go, hey, man, I think I jumped the gun. I think that it still looks like Hillary's going to win, but it's changing. And he's like, oh, Greg, this is great. But about the fake thing, we're out there, right? I won't say what we're doing, but I'm outside. But anyway, we're two tourists walk by, Brits. And, they're in their middle age. They look like they're dressed the way they'd be dressed in their 20s, but they're middle aged. They look like they've been walking around Times Square, and they come up to me and they go, excuse me. The man goes, excuse me, would you know the results yet of who's winning? And I go, well, it looks to me like Hillary is ahead. And he just jumps in the air and he goes, yes, yes. And then they hug, and it was like so ostentatious, so phony.
Incredible.
It was like an appeasement signal, because they thought, oh, I'm in New York City. They'll be happy that I'm doing this. And it was great because the doorman just stared at them, stoic and just with a grim face. And so they were like looking at us, and we were just like staring, and they just kind of like looked and they go, so is this a bar? And he goes, yes, it's a bar. And they just kind of scurry away to Times Square, but they thought that, you know what it is? It's the assumption that you run into on campuses. It's the assumption you run into in publishing companies, that you can display obnoxiously your views, your left-wing views, your liberal views, because everybody around you feels the same way. Meanwhile, the people that are quiet just have to sit there and take it. Well, it was like a microcosm.
And so
on the street.
Let me build on that. So I see what many of my colleagues post regarding Trump and so on, right? And it is so, genuinely offensive. It is so intolerant of the possibility that someone who might be on their feed might actually hold a different position. You talk about, I hate that word that the faux liberals use, the othering, right? You talk about othering, right? They will construct a reality, or at least they did prior to Trump's victory, whereby, only a degenerate, toothless, Appalachian man who rapes any, hikers and who denies evolution and is part of the KKK could ever, even for a moment, entertain the possibility that someone might prefer Trump. And then you think about, for someone who is so offended by everything, right? If you don't address somebody by their preferred gender pronoun, you go into a march and you're so outraged, but you don't, using sort of some non-broken moral compass, come to the conclusion that it might be inappropriate for you to be positing such things. Now, I happen to be somebody who luckily is endowed with very, very large testicles, and so I walk and I speak my mind and I don't care. But imagine all the other professors who may not love Hillary. Imagine all the students on campuses who might say, oh, but professor, can I offer you a possibility of something that I heard SAAD say on Sam Harris's show regarding the lexicographic rule, which you mentioned earlier? That student would never say that. And that's grotesque. That is an affront to the purpose of our educational system. And in a second, I'll ask you to comment, but I want to get back to your background at UC Berkeley, the headquarters of that bullshit. But comment on what I just said and then link it to your background at UC Berkeley.
Well, it's interesting because I was just going to go there. One of the encouraging things, I was at Hofstra for the presidential debate. I think it was the last one, or it might have been the first one. It was the first one. So I'm there. We're doing a live 5, and there's all these kids, students, demonstrating, very positive for Hillary. But the weird thing that blew my mind was all of the Trump kids. And I'm thinking back to 1983 at Berkeley. There was no such thing as a conservative or Republican kid with his mouth open. His mouth was shut. And I'm looking at this and I'm watching these kids walking down the quad with signs going, lock her up, or whatever the slogan was. And it was fun. There was no violence. There was nothing. And I'm going, something's happening on campus. There is a rebellion against the PC hyper-tolerant or intolerant movement. And now they're not scared anymore. Now, going back to Berkeley, I was a freshman in 83. I was very left-wing. I worked at I guess not left-wing. I guess I was a conventional teenager, which is the same thing as being a left-winger, because you have these romantic ideals that are untethered to consequence. You think that all the money that you're getting comes from your dad's wallet, and you don't know where that money comes from, that it actually comes from some other. You don't connect any dots. You only connect one dot. And so I worked for the nuclear freeze to get extra credit. That was in high school. So like if you got this is for a religion class, you got a clipboard and you went to the churches and stood outside, and if you got signatures for this petition that would prevent nuclear weapons from being transported in California, you could get, like, if you had a B- in religion class, you could get it up a half a grade to a B. If you got more signatures, you'd get a B+. So this is perfect. Just 1 hour outside of St. Gregory's, which is my parish, I would just stand there and get signatures. So that's how that. So it's already ingrained that this works for you, that you can be rewarded for liberalism. That's in high school. I'm being rewarded for this. So when you get to campus, you understand that you're going to get rewarded by professors and whatnot. And so when I got there, that was where I saw it for real. And I didn't understand. Like, I never saw so many aggressive people. They had become complacent. They knew that they could do this. They knew they could shout at you. And I remember walking home from the library, and there was some kind of, like, there was a protest or a march. And it was like a take back the night thing, something like that. And they started shouting at me. And I remember I was just walking, minding my own business, College Avenue.
Let me guess what it was before you go on. It's because you're a white male, therefore you are part of the patriarchy.
Yeah.
Therefore you are part of the mechanism that institutes the rape culture. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah, but I didn't see. I was so naive. I probably never even heard of the word patriarchy. I was like a freshman in college. All I wanted was to get good grades and stay out of trouble. I never raised my hand in class. I just, like, I'd come in with a hangover.
Boy, you've become a lot more vocal later in life.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, you know what happened is, like, I go, like, why is everybody yelling at me? I didn't get it. And then you had the shanties being built on campus. Now, there was a legitimate protest going on about apartheid during that era. But then they were building shanty towns. And then there were people living there. And then there were crimes being committed, assaults being committed on women by people that were, like, kind of interlopers. Kind of like what happened with Occupy Wall Street in Zuccotti Park, where people would get mugged or horrible things would happen, because that's what happens when authority goes away, it becomes anarchy. But somebody, I don't know what happened, but I was like, well, what the hell is going on? I don't understand this. And a friend of mine gave me National Review and the American Spectator. And I ended up working at the American Spectator and writing for National Review. But there was actually funny stuff in there. And I didn't know that there was another point of view. There was a section called This Week in National Review, which had little snippets. And they were about the absurdities of campus life. And I thought this was great. And then the American Spectator had something called Current Wisdom, where they just took out bits from liberal publications and just left them there with maybe a title or a blurb. And I'm like going, wow, there are actually people that are making fun of this stuff. I didn't know that existed. That was the open door that I walked through. And then I started reading, subscribing, and finding books. And then I took my internship at the National Journalism Center right when I graduated, which was kind of an internship program for conservatives in media. And then from there, I went to the American Spectator and made no money, eating hot dogs, living in the basement of a house in Arlington, Virginia, with two elderly women. It was like you're talking about, you were starting at the bottom, and that's right. And it kind of was like, I think I needed to see what it was like at Berkeley for me to have that change take place.
I want to come back to the campus thing, but since you mentioned conservatives in media, I want to quote to you a study which maybe you're familiar with. So let me just read it. It's a 2014 study titled "The American Journalist in the Digital Age." It was conducted by two then Indiana professors. I think one of them has now left to University of Kentucky, where they looked at the political affiliations of journalists. As reported by themselves, right?
Right.
And 7% of reporters were Republican, but apparently there's no such thing as a liberal media bias. 4 times as many Democrats, which only puts it at 28% for Democrats, the others being, quote, independent, which is another word for I am a Democrat, but I don't wish to admit it to you.
Yeah.
So the bottom line, the only thing that you wish that you should take away from the study is that 7% of journalists are Republicans. But then when you tell the faux liberals that there might be some bias in the media, they say that's outrageous. Only a Breitbart Nazi would say something like that.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 points to make. Nowadays, if you are not a liberal, you're a rebel. I mean, it should be a badge of honor now. It should be the way Abby Hoffman was in the early 70s. You know, if you're a conservative on campus, you should be viewed as like the new Abby Hoffman. I used to say that Breitbart was like that for me. But these studies have been around. There was a study I remember that they looked at voting records, and it was like 90 some odd percent voted Democrat. There was there's no uniformity like this in any other profession. Like even in like if you look at bankers,
academia,
Democrats,
academia has roughly the same ratios. So, for example, there's a study. Sorry to interrupt you, but there is a study that looked at political affiliations of professors at a bunch of universities. I often quote the study, and across disciplines, it was 5-1. Democrats, which is bad enough, but now in all the social activism field, in all the touchy-feely fields, sociology and humanities and so on, sociology, it was 44-1 the ratio. So I mean, again, now by the way, when I tell people these types of statistics, the typical response from them, which is frankly laughable and grotesque, is that, well, of course journalists and professors are going to be Democrats because they are smart and educated, right? So the only possibility, you having a different foreign policy perspective or a different fiscal policy perspective, which are not clear black and white issues, that is simply because you're an idiot. And so they just reaffirm their echo chambers, and it's an impenetrable echo chamber.
Yeah. And that's why they completely missed this election.
Exactly.
Like I would say in my circle of friends, I think I said this on the 5, a third were voting Trump, a third was not going to vote for Trump. It could be Gary Johnson, a third might go Hillary, and then I would say another third, but that would be 4/3. So a third within the third of not Trump, probably not voting, maybe. But because of that, I knew it was going to be close, and I knew that there's a possibility Trump would win. But if you talk to people that were like at the New York Times, they assumed it was going to be a blowout because they didn't know one single person that was for Trump. My sister and her husband have had friends they live in California, have friends that are very liberal. They treat them like anomalies, like your devil unicorn. They were so like everything's going to be Hillary's going to win big. So they treated them, they patronized them. When Trump won, the Facebook pages became so bitter and so angry. And the people that were for Trump, like my sister and her husband, weren't allowed to say anything.
Right.
They couldn't gloat because that would be wrong if they gloated. However, if Hillary had won, it would have been perfectly okay for them to parade it around and put hearts on their Facebook pages and historical firsts and show the shattered glass ceiling, But so they lose. That side loses, and they are beyond themselves, and they're actually arguing and saying blaming people, like it's because of you the country's going to hell. And it's like, what happened to the greater good? What happened to the heart's in the right place? What happened to you people? Like, this is the democratic system.
Well, I think so. I'm going to analogize what happened in terms of the echo chamber with something that happens with professors. So oftentimes when professors receive their teaching evaluations at the end of the semester, they're surprised that they didn't do as well as they did. And the reason for that is related to overconfidence that stems from this very, I hope you'll agree, insightful observation. Only the students who thought you were great come up to you in your office and say, hey, Professor SAAD, I really loved your course. I think it was great. And so my brain only codes the 7 students who came up to me and thought I was great. But any other student who thought that I was the devil unicorn didn't knock on my door and say, you know what, Professor SAAD, you really suck. And therefore, I think that everybody loves me, but then I receive my teaching evaluations and I realize that there is a multiplicity of opinions about my performance. Well, this is exactly what happened in this election, right? Everybody that all these castrated class speak to, Hillary Clinton is wonderful and we're going to have this collective orgasm when she wins, and only some hicks that we never interact with could possibly want the devil to win. And then they're shocked, right? Because they never code that possibility.
Yeah. And I mean, even I was surprised. I just thought it was going to be close, but I thought she was going to squeak by.
So
I thought he was going to win popular vote, and she was going to win the Electoral College. I'm not even sure what the popular vote is now, but I think I got it up. I mean, he won the electoral, and she was winning the popular vote.
Right.
I don't know if he actually overtook her. I don't know if he did. I should look that up, given that I go on TV and talk politics.
So let's go back to. I know that you have to leave by 11, so I'm being very careful with the time. Let's go back to campuses and discuss some recent cases. Maybe you've heard of them. If not, I'll briefly summarize them and then we can go on. So there are a couple of cases that have recently come up where professors, and of course I include myself in this packet, are fighting back against political correctness. Luckily for me, there haven't been any repercussions, but other professors have been suffering quite gravely. So there's a couple of cases. I'll mention a few cases. So Jordan Peterson, I don't know if you know this case. Are you familiar with it?
No, but I'm sure I've read it, but I don't know the name.
Okay, and then there's another one actually in your neck of the wood, Michael, what is his name? Rechtenwald from NYU. So I thought I would mention both of them. So Jordan Peterson is a guy who's actually been on my show. He reached out to me and came on my show about a month ago. He's a University of Toronto professor of psychology, who basically decided that he was going to voice an opinion, thinking that Canada was a democratic country where freedom of speech is allowed. What an idiot for having thought that. He decided that he was going to weigh in as a professor, as an academic, as a citizen, against a tabled bill called Bill C-16, whereby they were incorporating gender expression and gender identity as separable group that are amenable to hate crime, right? And he was demonstrating that the manner in which, never mind whether those groups should be included or not, he was arguing that the language of the bill was so vague, right? If you do something or don't do something, if you say something or don't say something, if it's intentional or unintentional, you could be held, accountable. And so then he was called by the University of Toronto, and really an Orwellian move where they're saying, look, you have to stop saying this. And now he might potentially end up losing his job. He's a tenured professor who's very, very accomplished. So that's one. And I'll mention the other one very quickly, and then I'll ask you to weigh in. And these certainly would be guys that would be great to come on your show. Not that I wish to serve as their publicist. Because before they come, I think we both know who should be on your show on a regular basis.
We proved that point.
Michael Rechtenwald is a guy at NYU who was speaking out against the safe spaces and the microaggressions and the trigger warnings and so on. And then NYU came after him hard. Now, I don't know exactly what caused them to turn the tide. And now I think they've given him a raise, maybe because of public outcry. So, you've got Brexit, then you've got Donald Trump, then you've got this guy being overturned. Are we smelling a shift in the winds, sir?
I think so, and I go back to that when I was at Hofstra, and I was just struck by I've never seen students vocal about anything that wasn't left wing. Like it's always left wing. So I thought, my God, maybe this is happening. And I know, and I've been invited to speak at colleges, and when I do my book signings, there's a lot of kids out there, and they're like not. I think part of it is humor. That they now are. I think humor is the best way to deal with this stuff. And I think it's like, why are we taking these people seriously? And I think that's the first step. No longer take them seriously. I do think that parents, the one flaw in this, parents aren't keeping up on these schools. Like they're not doing the investigative work. Like what's happening on this campus? Do I want to send my kid to a brainwashing cult? Because that's what it is. And it's like, imagine you have a kid who leaves high school, straight A student, really smart, wants to do, and all of a sudden he gets involved in these soft sciences that have no future. Whether it's, I don't know, whatever studies you can
women,
what it does.
Women, but not spelled MEN, it's MYN, right?
Right. Well, I think correct spelling is a patriarchal construct.
Very true.
Why should you tell me what is the correct spelling of the word when a man probably wrote that dictionary?
Well, by the way,
I feel the same way about math.
That's why it's just wrong to correct somebody, and it's racist if they're speaking in the dialect of Ebonics, right? Because you are saying that their manner of speaking is grammatically incorrect. That's racist.
Isn't there a movement against math? I remember reading something about people saying, activists on campus saying that like the absolutes of math are patriarchal, and sexist. Like math is inherently sexist,
right? So
which is actually sexist against women when you say that. Because you're saying it's sexist against women. They're basically saying that women can't handle math because it's absolute.
Well, Lawrence,
have you seen this?
Yes, I have. So it's. I mean, I think I'll speak about the specific instance you're talking about, but I'll give you sort of the background of that kind of inane stupidity. I think you're talking about Science Must Fall. And it was a bunch of social activists at University of Cape Town who were, very, very, post-apartheid, science is a Western way of thinking and so on. And you have to decolonize your mind, right?
Yes.
Now, that idiocy actually stems from one of the, quote, intellectual movements that has infected Western universities, postmodernism, right? So postmodernism is rightly referred to as an anti-science movement because it takes the central foundation of what science is, which is there are regular patterns in nature that we try to humbly, with humility, understand as scientists as best as we can. And they say, no, that's a completely wasted effort because everything is subjective. Everybody has their own way of knowing. There is no privileged way of knowing as per the scientific method. So stop this, you racist Nazi. So that's what started all this. And for 40 years, you've been inoculating at UC Berkeley and other schools, kids with postmodernism. And then you end up with the science must fall. But the same people who say science must fall take a plane that is based on principles of aerodynamics to their conference to spew the bullshit that science must fall. That irony, they miss it.
Yeah, it's amazing. But again, I go back to, there has to be an alternative to this. If campuses aren't going to change, then there has to be, can't there be a parallel universe of campuses where you go, okay, you're not going to have any of this deconstruction bullshit. You're not going to have any of this postmodern crap. You're actually going to learn the humanities. You're going to learn a trade. I mean, that's what Peter Thiel and people should be thinking about. Like, what's the alternative? I know he says don't go to college.
Right.
Well, I think I remember he was going to pay $100,000 to students not to go to school, which is actually a pretty cool thing. I would have taken that, definitely. I probably would have ended up drunk somewhere, like on an island, and you never would have heard from me again. It wouldn't have worked for me. I needed discipline. Right. But I think that there has to be at some point another path because they're now indoctrinating students into a useless future.
Right.
Like, what are they going to do? Well, you're no longer a productive member of society if all you do is file grievances.
Well, the bottom line is, education is, of course, to learn something in terms of the knowledge base. You have to learn, if you're taking differential equations in a math program, you have to learn what differential equations is. But more generally, you just have to learn how to critically think, right? So independently of whether you use the humanities to achieve that goal or neurobiology, the idea is that there is a framework for reason, whether we call it the scientific method or use logic or use some other mechanism. You're teaching people how to critically think, irrespective of the discipline that they're in. So to speak to your point, any discipline that is an affront to reason and science is anti-intellectual, is fraudulent, and should be kicked out of the campuses.
Yeah. Here's a funny story. When I was at Berkeley, I learned that I had to play the game, which was deconstruction.
Oh, yes.
So it didn't matter what the author's intent was. You can apply a different intent. And I had my thesis was on Herman Melville. And so I did it. I went into the library and I looked up and I found all this stuff on like the homoerotic themes of Herman Melville. So I wrote my thesis on that. It was like it should have gotten an A. But somehow I had the only professor who wouldn't buy that bullshit. He was an old school humanities professor. He looked like a sailor. And so I get my paper back expecting to sail through. And I think I got like a C minus. And I'm looking down and all he's writing in the margin is, "You got to be kidding me. Come on."
I like this guy. I'd like to bring him on the show. Is he still alive?
He must have been okay. He was talking 83. He was probably in his 60s. So I don't
okay.
think he's around.
Okay.
But I always think about that. I was thinking about I should Google this dude because he saw right through me. He saw, maybe he didn't know I was playing a game and he just thought that I believed it. But he was just like, you're completely nuts.
You know,
and it was right because I wasn't using my mind. I wasn't.
There's a professor who I think is retired now, and I tried to reach out to him, but he's Professor Emeritus. He's also in his 80s. His name escapes me right now, but he's a professor of philosophy at Princeton who wrote a book, which if you haven't read, you need to go and buy it after we get off. It's called, and this is a very highbrow guy, it's called On Bullshit, where he does a philosophical analysis of bullshit in the grand sense, all sorts of sort of cancerous, fraudulent movements and ideas. And I just thought, what a brilliant title. So anyways, check him out. Are there any things that before we wrap up, any things that you're, not that you need my small platform to promote your ideas, you sort of operate in a bigger platform, but can I offer you this small platform to promote anything that you're currently working on that's not yet public?
I would just push everybody to try to watch my show, which is on Fox. It's doing great. It's on at 10 p.m. Eastern time on Fox News. And there's just my wife. Come here. Say hello, Elena.
Oh.
This is Elena. There she is.
I can't see her. Hi there. Hi there. You got yourself
You're in Quebec, right?
I'm sorry?
You're in Quebec, right?
I am in La Belle Province, Montreal, Quebec. Come up and see us. Yeah,
we've always wanted to go, but some things kept me out of Canada. We won't get into that. But anyway, but the show's doing good. I'm gonna probably start writing another book, but I haven't figured out. I keep writing proposals. I don't know if you've done this. You write a proposal, and then you're done. It's like, okay, that's out of my system.
Right.
I don't want to write the book. I wrote the proposal, and then my agent will go, okay, when you get it started, I go, I have another idea because I actually want to write about artificial intelligence, but I don't think I'm equipped to.
Right.
I don't think I have the mathematical science background to do it. But I've read Bostrom's book. I keep picking up books on this, and I keep going because politics is exhausting after a while, and you make so many enemies amongst friends. I thought, do something totally different,
right?
And get out of that. But I realized maybe I'm just not I'm not equipped for hard thoughts. I'll just stick to politics.
Well, listen, based on the spitfire speed at which you carry your show, I think you're definitely not lacking IQ, sir. So I think keep up the great work. And it was an absolute pleasure having you on.
You're in New York. You got to come and do the show.
Please, thank you so much.
We used to tape on Fridays and Saturdays, so it's a lot of fun.
It'll be an honor. Thank you so much. Stay on the line. Guys, check out Greg's work on Fox. Talk to you soon. Thanks, Greg.
You got it.